The morning sun cast long shadows across the rolling hills as Madison pulled her sleek black sedan to the side of the dusty country road. Steam rose from under the hood of her car like a white flag of surrender. She sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, watching the vapor drift into the clear blue sky. This was not how she had planned to spend her Saturday morning. Madison was supposed to be at her favorite cafe in downtown Chicago by now, meeting clients and discussing her latest interior design project. Instead, she found herself stranded on a road that seemed to stretch endlessly through farmland she had never really noticed before. She stepped out of the car, her designer heels clicking against the asphalt. The contrast was striking. Her navy blue dress and polished appearance seemed almost foreign against the backdrop of golden wheat fields and weathered fence posts. The silence was different here too. No honking horns or bustling crowds. Just the gentle whisper of wind through tall grass and the distant sound of machinery. That's when she noticed the red tractor parked nearby, its hood raised like her car's. A man stood beside it, wiping his hands on a faded work shirt. He had broad shoulders and sun-weathered skin, with light brown hair that caught the morning light. Even from a distance, she could see the concentration on his face as he studied whatever problem lay beneath the tractor's hood. Madison hesitated. She wasn't used to asking strangers for help, especially not in places like this. But her phone showed no signal, and the nearest town was miles away. She took a deep breath and walked toward the man, her heels making soft crunching sounds on the gravel shoulder. "Excuse me," she called out as she approached. "I'm sorry to bother you, but my car seems to have overheated. I don't suppose you know anything about engines." The man looked up from his tractor and turned toward her. His eyes were a warm brown, kind and patient. He wiped his hands more thoroughly on his shirt before extending one toward her. "I'm Jake," he said with a genuine smile. "And yes, I know a thing or two about engines. Looks like we're both having mechanical troubles this morning." Madison shook his hand, surprised by the gentleness of his grip despite the calluses she could feel on his palm. "I'm Madison. And thank you. I really don't know much about cars beyond putting gas in them." Jake chuckled softly. "Well, let's take a look at yours first. Overheating is usually something we can fix pretty easily." They walked back to her sedan together. Jake popped the hood and peered inside, his experienced eyes quickly assessing the situation. Madison found herself studying his profile as he worked. There was something calming about his presence, something that made her feel less anxious about being stranded. "Your radiator hose came loose," Jake explained, pointing to a disconnected rubber tube. "It's an easy fix, but we'll need to let the engine cool down first and find some water to refill the radiator." "Water?" Madison looked around at the endless fields. "Where would we find water out here?" Jake gestured toward a cluster of buildings in the distance, barely visible through a line of trees. "There's a farmhouse over there. We can get what we need." He paused, studying her face. "But first, maybe you could help me with this old girl here." He patted the tractor's fender affectionately. Madison looked at the massive machine with its complex array of parts and pieces. "I'm not sure how much help I'd be. I've never even been this close to a tractor before." "Sometimes a fresh pair of eyes is all you need," Jake said encouragingly. "And an extra pair of hands doesn't hurt either." Something in his tone made Madison nod. She found herself genuinely curious about this world that was so different from her own. "Okay, what do you need me to do?" Jake explained that the tractor's starter was giving him trouble. He needed someone to turn the key while he worked on something underneath. Madison climbed up into the high seat, feeling oddly small in the spacious cab. The view from up there was spectacular. She could see for miles across the rolling countryside, taking in details she had never noticed from her car window. "Now," Jake called from beneath the machine. Madison turned the key, and the engine coughed to life with a deep, satisfying rumble. She couldn't help but smile at the sound. There was something powerful and honest about it, so different from the quiet purr of her sedan. Jake emerged from under the tractor, a broad grin spreading across his face. "Perfect. You're a natural." As Madison climbed down from the cab, she stumbled slightly on the last step. Jake was there instantly, steadying her with gentle hands on her arms. For a moment, they stood close together, and Madison caught the scent of earth and honest work that seemed to cling to him. It wasn't unpleasant. In fact, it was surprisingly comforting. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "Thank you," Jake replied. I've been fighting with that starter for 2 hours. Sometimes all it takes is the right touch. They worked together to fix Madison's car next. Jake showed her how to reconnect the radiator hose while he fetched water from a hand pump near the road. Madison was surprised to find herself enjoying the process of learning something completely new. Her hands got dirty for the first time in months, and instead of being bothered by it, she felt a strange sense of accomplishment. As they worked, they talked. Madison found herself sharing stories about her life in the city, her work designing spaces for busy professionals who rarely had time to enjoy them. Jake listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that made her think about her work in new ways. "What about you?" Madison asked as they waited for her engine to cool completely. "Have you always been a farmer?" Jake leaned against her car, looking out over the fields that stretched to the horizon. "I grew up here. Left for college, worked in the city for a few years actually. But this place called me back." He gestured toward the landscape around them. "There's something about being connected to the land, watching things grow, being part of something bigger than yourself." Madison followed his gaze, trying to see what he saw. The fields that had seemed empty and boring from her car window now looked different. She could see the careful rows of crops, the way the land rolled and dipped like a green ocean, the careful balance of it all. "It must be a lot of responsibility," she said thoughtfully. "Taking care of all this." Jake nodded slowly. "It is. But it's good responsibility, if that makes sense. You're taking care of something that takes care of others." There was something in his voice, a depth that made Madison look at him more carefully. She had assumed he was just a hired hand, someone who worked the fields for someone else. But the way he spoke about the land, the pride and care in his voice, suggested something different. "The water should be cooled down enough now," Jake said, checking under her hood. "Let's get you back on the road." They refilled the radiator together, and Jake double-checked all the connections. Madison's car started smoothly, the engine purring without any sign of distress. "You should be fine now," Jake said, closing the hood. "But you might want to have your mechanic take a look at that hose clamp when you get back to the city. Make sure it doesn't happen again." Madison nodded, but found herself reluctant to leave. The morning that had started as a disaster had turned into something unexpectedly pleasant. "Jake, I want to thank you properly. Can I buy you lunch? Or coffee? There must be somewhere nearby." Jake smiled, that same warm expression that had put her at ease from the beginning. "That's kind of you, but not necessary. I'm just glad I could help." "Please," Madison insisted. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here." Jake considered for a moment, then nodded toward the cluster of buildings in the distance. "Well, if you insist, there's a little cafe in town. Nothing fancy, but they make the best apple pie in 3 counties." They arranged to meet at the cafe in an hour, giving Jake time to finish securing his tractor and Madison time to clean up a bit. As she drove toward town, Madison found herself thinking about the morning's unexpected turn. There had been something different about Jake, something that set him apart from the men she usually met in her professional circles. The cafe turned out to be a charming little place with checkered tablecloths and walls covered in local photographs. Madison arrived first and chose a table by the window. When Jake walked in, she almost didn't recognize him. He had changed into clean jeans and a button-down shirt that brought out the color of his eyes. His hair was neatly combed, and he carried himself with a quiet confidence that made other patrons nod respectfully in his direction. "You clean up pretty well," Madison said with a smile as he sat down across from her. "So do you," Jake replied, though she hadn't changed clothes at all. They ordered coffee and pie, and their conversation picked up where it had left off by the roadside. Madison found herself telling Jake things she rarely shared with anyone, her doubts about her career, her feelings of disconnection despite being surrounded by people in the city, her sense that something important was missing from her life. Jake listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that helped her think through her feelings. When it was his turn to talk, he spoke about the challenges of modern farming, the satisfaction of harvest time, the way the changing seasons marked the rhythm of his life. "You mentioned you own your own design business," Jake said as they finished their pie. "That must keep you busy." "It does," Madison replied. "Though sometimes I wonder if I'm really making a difference. Most of my clients just want their spaces to impress other people. There's not much heart in it." Jake nodded thoughtfully. I imagine it would be hard to put your heart into something when you can't see its real purpose. Their conversation was interrupted by an older man who approached their table with a respectful nod to Jake. Sorry to bother you, Mr. Morrison, but I wanted to thank you again for extending our lease. My family really appreciates your understanding about the tough season we had. Madison watched as Jake spoke quietly with the man, his manner both humble and authoritative. After the man left, she looked at Jake with new curiosity. Mr. Morrison, she asked. Jake's cheeks colored slightly. I guess I should have mentioned. I don't just work the land around here. I own most of it. About 3,000 acres, plus the properties I lease to other farming families. Madison stared at him, pieces of the morning clicking into place. The way other people had nodded to him respectfully. The pride in his voice when he spoke about the land. The responsibility he had mentioned. You're not just a farmer, she said slowly. You're a landowner. A big one. Jake nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable. I inherited most of it from my grandfather. It's been in my family for 4 generations. I've added to it over the years, but the original homestead is where it all started. Madison sat back in her chair, reassessing everything she thought she knew about the morning's encounter. She had assumed Jake was just a kind farmhand who had helped her out of a jam. Instead, he was probably one of the wealthiest landowners in the county. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. Jake stirred his coffee thoughtfully. Because it doesn't matter, does it? I mean, it didn't matter when you needed help with your car, and it didn't matter when I needed help with my tractor. Sometimes it's nice to just be Jake, not Jake Morrison who owns half the county. Madison understood. In her world, people often approached her differently once they learned about her successful business or her family's money. There was something refreshing about Jake's desire to simply be himself, without the weight of expectations or assumptions. I'm glad you didn't tell me, she said finally. This morning it was exactly what I needed, even though I didn't know I needed it. Jake smiled. Funny how that works sometimes. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Madison found herself reluctant to say goodbye. The day had shown her something she hadn't expected to find, a different way of living, a different set of values, a different kind of success than what she had always pursued. Jake, she said as they stood beside their cars in the cafe parking lot. Would it be okay if I called you sometime? Maybe came back to visit. I'd like that, Jake replied. But Madison, I want you to know, if you do come back, it should be because you want to, not because you think you should or because you're looking for something to fill a gap in your life. This place, this life, it's not for everyone. Madison nodded, appreciating his honesty. I understand, but I think I'd like to find out if it might be for me. As she drove back toward the city that afternoon, Madison's mind was full of new thoughts and possibilities. The morning that had started with a breakdown had become something else entirely, a breakdown of assumptions, perhaps, or a breakthrough to understanding what she had been missing. The fields that had seemed empty and boring on her drive out now looked full of potential. She found herself slowing down to really look at them, to imagine the work and care that went into every acre, the families who depended on the land's generosity, the quiet satisfaction that came from being part of something larger than oneself. Her phone buzzed with missed calls and messages as she reached the edge of the city, pulling her back into the world of deadlines and client meetings. But something had changed. The urgency that usually drove her felt different now, less important somehow. That evening, as Madison sat in her perfectly designed apartment overlooking the city lights, she found herself thinking about Jake's words. About the difference between impressing people and making a real difference. About the satisfaction that came from honest work and genuine connection to something meaningful. She picked up her phone and, before she could change her mind, sent Jake a simple text, "Thank you for today. I hope your tractor is running smoothly." His response came quickly, "It is. Drive safely, Madison. The road back here will always be open." Madison smiled, setting her phone aside and looking out at the glittering city below. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt like she knew which direction she wanted to go. The question was whether she would have the courage to take that first step down a different road, one that led back to rolling fields, honest work, and a man who had shown her that sometimes the most valuable things in life were also the simplest.